Hey everyone, welcome to The Productive Dev. My name is Alyssa, and in today's video, we're going to talk about the top 4 lessons I learned at my first developer job and what they don't teach you as a computer science major. So this video will be coming primarily from the viewpoint of those of us who have more traditional CS backgrounds, since I can't vouch for what's taught in boot camps, and I'm hoping they maybe teach some of these things that are missing here. But I had some preconceived notions about what being a software developer entailed. And so, once I actually got out in the workforce, I learned a few things, and I wrote this blog post a few years ago now, but still relevant today, even in the age of AI. And so just wanted to create a quick video on that. And so the first skill that I didn't realize I needed was reading documentation. So a lot of times, you need to implement a feature and you need to brush up on the documentation to know how to use it. So one example of this is that I had to implement a drag and drop feature at my last company, and I'd never implemented drag and drop before. And so I went and did some research, some Googling, and found a library called D&D Kit. And then, so I went to their site, and then I, clicked on their documentation and then read through it. And then this helped me implement or know what the tools and, features that I needed to pull from to be able to implement drag and drop in our custom application. And so this is one example. Another example is, let's see, radix dialog. Sure. So radix primitives. Radix has a set of headless components called primitives. I work a lot on component libraries nowadays. And so a lot of times I use radix primitives under the hood. And so what I do is I go here, based on the pattern or thing that I need to implement. If I am going with radix, then I'll go here, look at their documentation, see how they're describing it, and then figure out what props I need to use and what part of their API I need to use to be able to implement the component that we need. And being that working on a lot of component libraries, I also work with a lot of accessibility stuff because I'm a big advocate for accessibility. So a lot of times I'm doing search for ARIA authoring practices guide, how to implement accessible patterns. I'll go on their view patterns page. So actually a few weeks ago, I had to implement a meter component. And so I went here, took a look at, what's the role that needs to be used? What are the ARIA attributes that need to be applied to make sure that as I'm implementing components, this is what I'm implementing by hand instead of using a headless library like radix, knowing what I need to make sure it's accessible. So that's just a brief example of how, referencing documentation, especially in this world where there are so many open source libraries nowadays, very seldom are you implementing things from scratch. Learning to read documentation is just super duper handy and really essential as a developer. And the next thing on the list is communication. So one thing that was interesting is that as a CS major, a lot of the projects you work on are, individual or in your own silo, which makes sense from an education standpoint because, the school is trying to assess you as a student, and sometimes group projects have these bad things associated with them. But I think only one project in my entire degree that I actually work in a group, and it wasn't really the best experience because I had never worked in a group before, so communication wasn't great, all that stuff. But now working as a developer in the real world, I very rarely work by myself. And even if I am working by myself in a particular part of the code base, another engineer will be reviewing my code. So, knowing how to communicate in a pull request, hey, this is what I did, this is what I implemented, this is why I implemented it this way, that's helpful. So like written communication, but also just verbal communication with talking to teammates, knowing how to ask questions. If you want to learn to mentor people, knowing how to explain things, all that kind of stuff, it's very helpful. A lot of times, sometimes you're giving demos of feature work that you've been implementing. Like all of those kinds of things are communication that I didn't learn until I was on the job. So that's just one example of communication that I felt like was missed in school. And next up is refactoring and maintaining code, which is probably maybe the thing we do the most on as an engineer. So a lot of times when you're working at a company, you're working on code that has already been there, right? Like, especially working for a SaaS company, like you're diving into a code base that already exists. it's awesome to get to work on greenfield projects. And I have had the opportunity to work on a project where like I get to decide what the tech stack is. I mean, usually there's like an ADR, an architectural decision record, where you have to, again, communicate with the team to evaluate and decide on a tech stack that will be used. But, once you've, barring those rare occasions, most of the times you're hopping into a code base. I mean, I'm doing this now at my current job where it was outsourced, contracted out to implement a mobile app. And now we're bringing that code base into our ecosystem, and I'm having to help maintain it. And so being comfortable with, understanding how to dive into a code base, quickly, look through what's being done, so the patterns that are being used, how to familiarize yourself with the code base is very helpful, because that's just kind of the reality of stuff. Even if you do get the opportunity to work on a greenfield project, eventually, that project will be one that you're maintaining. So, just making sure that you're picking the right technologies, implementing the proper patterns to just set yourself up for success. So that's just a major part of being a developer right now. Whereas in school, it's always a new thing, right? Like always a new project. And so that was a kind of a hard reality I learned when I started as an engineer. And then last but not least is just learning on the job. And this is one of the fun parts about it. When I was a CS major, the main language we used was C and C++. And right now, I basically haven't used C or C++ since I graduated. I'm primarily a front-end developer now. I focus on component libraries and accessibility and React. And so, I had no exposure to web technologies, but just throughout my career, I was able to get that experience. And so at my first job, I worked on AngularJS. And I was learning about MVC and two-way binding. But then I had to, at one point I was working on a completely back-end project where I was working procedural language SQL. I've had to just, especially earlier on in my career, hop around. Just like I was really green and I was like, hey, I want to help out wherever I can. Now that I'm kind of old and set in my ways a little bit, I focus more on certain areas. But even now that I focus primarily on the front end, I work at a company that has a Laravel PHP backend. I'm trying to learn a little bit of Laravel so that I can be more familiar in pull requests and just, expand my knowledge as a front-end developer. So the biggest thing is to just embrace the unknown and uncomfortableness and enjoy the journey of learning by doing. So this is just a quick video kind of outlining just the 4 things that I feel like I didn't learn as a computer science major. And I'm curious if you all can also relate to this. I hope you found this helpful, and I'll catch you in the next video.